Hello, everybody. Welcome. It's George Leoniak back with New Geometry. And today we have another new conversation, and I'm super thrilled to have Jaqueline Tees here. She was part of my apprenticeship that was back in December. And I'm just so thankful because she was new to this subject, and we met on Facebook and not Facebook, YouTube, and she was doing some comments, and then she decided to go for the apprenticeship. And yeah, so thrilled to hear a little bit about her experience of that, as well as just her journey with sacred geometry and even what led her into it. So Jaqueline, you want to introduce yourself, and you can share where you're from or anything, other details you'd like.
Yeah, hi, I'm Jaqueline. I am from a very tiny island called Guernsey in the Channel Islands of the United Kingdom. So I live quite a sheltered existence over here in Guernsey, although I haven't led a sheltered existence. I have been exploring sacred geometry for quite a few years before George and I connected, along with a very convoluted spiritual journey that I've been on for the last 16 years. So that, yeah, that's the sacred geometry has formed part of the all-encompassing spiritual journey I've been on. So it's just been another aspect of that, really.
Yeah, well, what was kind of the thing that kind of led you? I mean, how did you even find the video that the video that drew you into this? Because that's where we started interacting. You were asking some questions. Was it the Metatrons?
It was something about the crystal grid.
Oh, the crystal spiral.
Knocked something over behind me. Yeah, and I remember I was annoyed. And I felt like it was incongruent to the sacred geometry that I'd been learning. So I'd on my sacred geometry journey, I had, been exposed to the circles coming together and creating the, seed of life, flower of life, tree of life, etc., and expansion. And then I think I saw some commentary. It wasn't yours. But I saw some commentary on the crystal grid, and I felt like it was not the truth, is the only way I can put it. I felt like it was an ulterior concept, but that was not the truth. And so I did a YouTube search, and your video on the crystal grid was something that came up. So I looked at it, and I think I remember sending a comment that I was like, well, I was probably a bit arsey about it. But we had a little bit of an exchange, and then I kind of just like opened up to it a bit more and was like, well, that's kind of just another way of seeing it. And I obviously, just haven't seen this way of looking at it before. And then I think there was a few more exchanges between us, and all of a sudden, the next thing I knew, you're like, well, I'm doing this sacred geometry apprenticeship. Would you like to be a part of it? And I was initially like, yeah. And then I kind of didn't hear anything more about it. And after a few weeks, I realized your emails had gone into like my junk mail or like another. So I hadn't seen any of the stuff you'd sent me. And then I suddenly found it, and I was like, yes, okay, I'd like to. And then I still didn't really do anything about it. And you kind of just prodded me a few times. I was like, right, okay, this is divine intervention. Sort your shit out, Jaqueline. Sign up for this course. And yeah, so I feel like it was, and the journey that I'd been on, it felt like a natural progression. And I had been contemplating starting to draw sacred geometry for myself previous to connecting with you. and I just hadn't got round to doing it. So I'd seen lots of videos. I'd, you know, meditated to a lot of sacred geometry imagery. And then I'd been thinking to myself, I really should start practice drawing this. So I obviously had sent that intention out into the universe, and then the universe, you know, completed the circle by sending me you. And I'm really thrilled that I signed up for the course. It was, you know, it's been, you know, really eye-opening, met and connected with some really lovely souls. And we had a, you know, I felt that we had a really great experience together.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that was really interesting because I think my comment on the YouTube was like, you're asking some questions. I was like, have you ever really done any drawing sacred geometry? And you're like, no, I haven't really much yet. So I was like, you know, maybe that's your next step really, is to start drawing it. And that's when I said, check out the apprenticeship. And then I guess I was persistent enough in that because you expressed interest. So, you know, then I always follow up and say, hey, you're still interested in doing it. And then never heard back. And then finally, I guess you found them in the junk mail, at least. Something you said to me, or in your comments that you mailed to me before this, you were saying, well, you were really surprised with like how we started off the apprenticeship, because, you know, you were probably, you said you were expecting me to go through the seed of life, tree of life, flower of life, fruit of life, and kind of go through those things. And you had some comments that I thought were really interesting, kind of about my approach and just how that worked for you throughout this. You had any comments for that and how it kind of changed your perception or perspective of the way I was working with our weeks that we were together?
Yeah, so like I said, with the title of the course being Sacred Geometry Apprenticeship, and being a complete novice, having never drawn any sacred geometry in my life, but having knowledge of it and how it worked, I really thought you'd be like really gentle with us and we'd be like drawing circles in the first weeks, and you know, and then I just remember the first lesson, you were like, right, we're going to square the circle and we're going to draw a pyramid, and I'm going to show you how to find phi. And I'm like, okay, great. And was so totally beyond my expectations. But I think, like I said, I was surprised at how you really threw us into the deep end, but surprised with myself and how I kept up. Maybe not always kept up to speed actually in the live lesson, but I did pretty well considering I'd never done it before. And then, like, when you always sent the videos afterwards, and I could work at my own speed and catch up. And I was kind of then, in hindsight, grateful for the fact that you didn't just get us drawing circles, you know, for a couple of weeks, and you did like really do this deep dive, because I think it was much more expansive and much more eye-opening. And I think, you know, a lot of it would have been like, well, I kind of already know. Once you've seen a few videos of somebody, you know, patterning the circles on top of each other, there's not much more you can do with the circles after that, except you did by adding the phi circles, you know, and that's probably much later on in the conversation. But yeah, and so in hindsight, even though it wasn't what I was anticipating, being a novice and signing up to an apprenticeship, believing it was going to be a lot more basic, in hindsight, I'm very glad that it wasn't. And you did take us on this, you know, deep dive journey. It was good.
Great. Well, you know, I think it's maybe nice to show some of the work that you produced through it, because I think most people who heard just what you said would be like, oh, geez, you were struggling in the back. You're going to have a bunch of chicken scratch drawings trying to keep up. But, you know, you did such a phenomenal job, and that's why I was so thankful that you were coming on, you know, decided to finally do the conversation that we're having today, because I was really thrilled to show some of this beautiful work. So I'm going to open up this share of the little presentation. These are some of the earlier ones that we did, and I think this was the 9-pointed star with the icosahedron in the middle. And, you know, some of these other designs, this is, I think, probably one we didn't do this one specifically. You were just, your own creativity was coming through on these.
Yeah.
So if you have anything you wanted to add or say about any of these.
So yeah, those are my cosmic 8 balls, I call them. Yeah, so some of it I just kind of, I can't remember what lesson that was from, but I just saw these like 8-ball pool balls in my mind, and I was like, yeah, that's what I want to create. And for me, it was, I had a real desire to create a complete picture each week. And I've signed up for your next course, and I think for the next course I would prefer to focus more really on the shapes, and really honing in on being able to create the shapes and the dimensionality in the shapes more. But for this last one, I really every week wanted to create a complete picture from start to finish, and I've never felt like a very creative person. I didn't do very well in art when I was at school. I felt like I wasn't very artistic or creative. And this really showed me that actually, maybe that's not actually true.
Yeah, and I think that was really beautiful as you expressed that to us through the apprenticeship. And then to see you each week, you know, producing these awesome designs. And that's really what I was hoping to kind of inspire, is give some basic patterns, which, you know, didn't seem basic to you at all. And they're definitely not basic patterns. Give you some complexity to work with, and then you run with it, you know. So it was always each week when you would send out the emails and other discoveries of YouTube videos or whatever you were up to during the week, always sharing something with the group. But every time you sent these amazing pieces, I was just like, wow, you know, I wouldn't have done it this way. And that's exactly the way it is. Sacred geometry inspires each of us to kind of find our own little seed nugget that's specifically for us through our angle and view. So these are just beautiful. So, you know, and then the forms, you know, the dodecahedron drawings that we were doing and working a lot with that. This one I really liked too, which was on the 18-pointed star week. I think you did this one kind of just on your own, because we only did 9 points, and then you turned it into 18 all on your own.
Yeah. Quite proud of myself for that one, because I was like, well, you know, obviously being a novice, I didn't really know what I was doing. And I tried it one way and I was like, no, that's not going to work. And then I just had an epiphany, and I was like, right, I can't even remember how I did it now, George, but I obviously did it, and it turned out pretty good. That's one of the ones that I'm most proud of. So yeah, like I said, I don't even know how I figured out to get the points in the background now, but
I'm surrounded with artwork like that around me here too. I'm surprised how I did some of these too. But, you know, I just think it's phenomenal that literally this is like the 4th or 5th week into the course, you know, maybe 6th week into it, you know, and it's so cool to see the progression. Even when, you know, the Giramondo week, you have a drawing of that up here soon as well. You know, you just decided to construct the form. Just, I think you're probably inspired by one of my videos too, around that time. You know, just to make the form, because you really resonated with these stellation patterns.
Yeah. That was a labor of love. That was, and ordinarily, I'm the type of person that I like instant gratification. And if something doesn't get produced quite quickly, I give up. That took me hours to construct that, and knowing myself, I don't know how I stuck it out. But as I said before, I was determined each week to like produce something from start to finish, and I would sit there with all of the pictures and with this 3D model that I built. I didn't move off my sofa until the thing was finished. So yeah, I learned a bit of patience and tenacity as well while doing this.
Yeah, what a great, I mean, I've been talking a lot about how sacred geometry is quite a mirror for us to learn about ourselves. You know, it's more than just producing a beautiful design or some sort of creation. There's a process that you go into, I imagine, and I'm sure you could share more on that. And maybe when we get out of these slides, we can go in that angle as well. But let's work our way through these. So this was probably our second week, I think, probably, because that was the dodecahedron with the accurate dimensions, you know, that I've talked about with the 5 circles. And I love the way you highlighted the 5 circles and the pattern that came out on that one. I'm not like an art critic or anything. I'm not very artistic in that way at all, but I just love seeing how you're expressing the patterns that I'm working with and we're sharing here. This one too, the star cut diagram week, that was awesome. I hadn't seen that one or this one. I don't think I remember seeing. Is this a newer one or something?
Maybe not, but sometimes I don't share the one. So for that one, for me, even though looking at it now, it's quite a nice, aesthetically pleasing pattern. But I think if you can see through the others that I've got this affinity with metallics and just a certain amount of colors, and the blacks and the silvers and the golds resonate with me very highly. So this, for me, there's too much color going on in that. So and I like the greens popping out to me now, and I'm like, no, that's not working for me at all.
Okay, we'll move on to another slide. Okay, scrap that one. Let's go to the.
So you know, you can see the main theme through most of the ones that I've done is these, you know, silvers and metallics, and yeah. I quite like oranges and yellows, but I did try some weeks to bring some different colors in because I didn't want to be just limiting myself to these the same colors every week. But when I did bring other colors in, it just didn't resonate with me at all.
Yeah, so you found kind of, you know, what really lights you up in doing it. You
know,
I have a certain color scheme that I like to work with too, that just really resonates with me for where I'm interested in and how the pieces look. And that's what I mean, that's once again learning a lot about our tendencies. And then, you know, going with it, because, you know, this one I really liked the metallics throughout this pattern, because this is, you know, because I think that's part of what we were doing is, you know, switching the view a lot. Remember, I mean, that was the one thing. It was like we do like the hexagon view, and then all of a sudden next week we'll draw the same form, you know, from this kind of square view orientation, and you learn a whole new set of techniques that build on themselves. But this one was the trichontahedron and the dodecahedron and icosahedron together in this view. So that was a cool one. And I loved when you started incorporating these little spiral patterns.
Yeah, using my little spirograph that I've got.
Yeah, you said you were like cheating.
But I was like, I'm so pedantic, and I mean, you can see how lined up perfectly they are, and they're so symmetrical, and I'm like, oh, I'm so anal about it. But I was quite impressed how this little, like the little grid that you use, like, so I lined it up with the, you know, the other 5 circles, and it worked like a dream. It was, yeah, in fact, I remember doing that one, and the little spirograph circle that I have that you put on the paper, and then the other piece fits in, was exactly the same size as those gold 5 circles. So it worked like a dream. It was like kismet.
Wow, that's great. That's always like a little signal from the universe when you build something and then put something else on it and it fits right on top perfectly. I love that feeling. That's
yeah,
really cool. Oh, and this one was just fabulous. I mean, this is when I was starting to introduce the stellation patterns to you. And this one, what a great drawing that is. This is a highly complex drawing to do, but this is week 7 or 8 or something like that. Or no, maybe week 6, I think. This is the Mundo pattern, the
Yeah,
Star of Happiness week. I have a whole video on that Star of Happiness.
yeah.
So
That
cool.
that I was elated with that shape. That shape lit me up, and then obviously inspired the 3D Giramondo model that I did.
Mhm.
And yeah, that was the start of the stellated shapes that you started showing us, and I was just blown away with the stellated shapes. And especially the blueprint that you created to draw them from. I found so for example, in the first weeks when we were doing the dodecahedron and icosahedron and the platonic solids, I found that it was quite even though I kept up okay, it was quite complex. There was a lot of lines. It was quite a convoluted process, and then you showed us the stellated shapes, and it just seemed so much simpler. I don't know if it actually was, but it just seemed like these really amazing stellated shapes were coming out of even the 60 pointed star. And I haven't done an artwork on this, but I was just amazed, even though it obviously took a long time to keep moving, our ruler to draw the lines for the 6. But in concept, it was very simple.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very simple concept, and it didn't take that. It wasn't that complicated. I was surprised, and yeah, I just had this real soul affinity and resonance with the stellated shapes. They changed my world, George.
Great. Yeah. Well, a lot of the stellated patterns that I've been working with, we'll be doing in the upcoming apprenticeship, because a lot more of them came through afterwards when we were done. All the Kepler Poinsot, I had the video on that I'm pretty sure you checked out. We'll be doing a few of those throughout too, because they're really interesting. And then doing the cutouts and stuff like that, they're just really, I don't know, there's such a different feel about having stellated patterns than the kind of solid forms, so, and they're not that much more complicated, like you're saying, and I think that leads into the circle and lines conversation that you sent me about too. So we'll hop into that. Let's just take a look at the last 2 patterns. And that was Icasa Dodeca week, and another one that I don't remember seeing this one, but as well, but probably early on, I think, or I don't remember you doing a lot of these little patterns around the edge.
No, I think that was later on. I picked up an early sketch. So I picked up an early, was actually a drawing from doing a lesson live, and I just picked it up and elaborated on it. And I was working with trying to do freehand mandalas that week, and practicing with colors. So that was just something you can see how rough the freehand is around the edges, but it kind of turned out kind of nice.
Yeah.
Kind of pleasing to my eye. So
I really like.
And then I tried to do a freehand mandala from scratch, and I just went, "Oh no, that's not happening."
I really love those embellishments, because the patterns that I present definitely are there's structure and order to them. I remember you were even saying I just want to try and do something different on my own. I'm not going to follow George's pattern this week or whatever. And but they do give a little bit of structure, especially if you kind of feel like you don't know how to do that art type, your own art process. At least for me, because I wasn't very artistically skilled. having the sacred geometry template kind of gave me the doorway to access that creativity like you that I didn't realize I had. I just needed some template to work with to help me orient me, you know, and then you can add those little embellishments, and that's what makes each of the patterns totally unique. You know, even if you gave someone the same exact pattern, they'd color it in completely different or add little squiggles
Yeah.
and stuff. So that's the beauty. Sacred geometry, you know, it's like snowflakes, literally. Everybody's going to produce a different version of the same pattern, probably. Cool. Well, yeah, those are just, I'm really glad we got to share those. There was a few in here that are part of your journey. Was there any like things in here that you wanted me to jump to, or you want to continue our conversation out of this?
I don't think there's anything particular. They were just like, I remember I sent you and the rest of the group an email one night, and I created this montage of well, that was something that I messaged about the journey of the planet to create those sacred geometry. But the others, most of the other stuff was like a little journey I went on through my own home. So like you've got pictures of that I've done from colouring in books, or segments of plant pot holders that I've got, or my incense burner, or some my towels and flowers that I had around. So just saw all of these. That was just obvious. That's obviously a spider's web that I'd captured. So just all these like little things that I saw around my house, and I was like, wow, I didn't realize how much sacred geometry is actually surrounding me. Until I went on this little like treasure hunt one night.
Yeah, I remember you sending those photos. It seems like it, you know, it was around, but maybe you developed a greater, even you already had a higher level of awareness of it already, but it sounds like you saw it in a different way, or you kind of deepened your relationship to it or experience of it a little bit, I guess it sounds like. From actually doing the drawings, you know, you can look at them and kind of see how they're constructed a little bit more, or go deeper into the pattern. Yeah, so those are some of the overview of kind of your journey throughout the apprenticeship. And, you know, there was a few other comments that you had sent me earlier, your reflections, that I thought were interesting to discuss, you know, because, you know, you really engaged with the sacred geometry in a very intuitive, spiritually oriented way, you know, and, you know, you were saying more on like what the circles represented to you and how they wove in with the straight lines. And, you know, if there's anything in your reflections that you wanted to share to help guide us in the conversation around your relationship to the patterns and what you were seeing emerge there for you from that intuitive level, kind of the conversation that you start to engage with the forms as you're working with them. Yeah, please feel free to share anything that's coming to you through that level.
So yeah, for me, even from the first week, it hit me quite powerfully that the circles represent the feminine aspect, and the lines or the forms, shapes represented the masculine aspect. And I could see very clearly on a two-dimensional level this blueprint of circles, and then we would create lines and shapes, and then they would become three-dimensional and almost stand out off the page. And it's all, for me, it's like you can create this three-dimensional shape and almost then lift it off of the blueprint. So you've got that shape, you can take it out, and then you've still got this blueprint of circles left, and you can just start all over again. It's just there as a basic blueprint all the time, isn't it? And and then you can go back and use the same circles, the same blueprint, and create a totally different shape.
Mm.
and then lift that out.
Yeah, I
So
think you described that kind of as like a birthing process with the kind of feminine circle energy kind of giving
yeah,
birth to these forms.
and as you saw, that is a massive aspect for me. It felt like a totally, like the circles are giving birth to the form, but it's not. The circles can't do it on. It's an interaction. It's the masculine, it's the feminine and the masculine coming together and creating something, as happens in all of nature. You can't, one doesn't do something without the other. The feminine and the masculine has to come together for something else to then be birthed from their interaction. So yeah, that really came through in the sacred in the drawings.
Yeah, and the drawings just kind of invoke that, because it wasn't something that I really came in with a very with my ideas around that, because of course I experienced it, but I was hoping that everybody would experience this for themselves to see what comes through. And then everybody, a lot of people in the group came back the next week, and a few of you all kind of said the same thing about how the circles related to that element of an energy, feminine type of energy, and how the lines are the more masculine. Now that's something that is in sacred geometry that's mentioned quite a bit, by different geometers, but there must be a difference when you experience that for yourself, doing the drawings throughout the 8 weeks and seeing that over and over again, than to just hear that, or to kind of relate to it in that context. So did you gain a deeper insight into that? It sounds like you did through the actual doing of it.
I definitely did, and it resonated. It hit upon other things that I've looked into, and one of the things that I'd looked into in the last couple of years, and before starting the Sacred Geometry Apprenticeship, is the actual male and female anatomy. And that when you study the basics of male and female anatomy, that the masculine form is created with straight lines, it's very angular, and then the female form is created with curves and is obviously more curvaceous. And that is standard. You go back to the shape of the skeletal system. It goes even. It's not just like the flesh that becomes angular or curved. It's in the basic construction of the skeleton. So when I saw that in sacred geometry, with the circles being the feminine and the lines being the masculine, that really hit home, and to the how sacred geometry is the building blocks of life and creates the different masculine and feminine forms. And you can see in nature that the masculine's more angular and the feminine is more curved. So that was really interesting to me, that it really does absolutely pull through to everything we see in form and matter around us.
Yeah, that's really great contemplation, and to actually then see that in the physicality, from the 2D page to the 3D world and other dimensions beyond. Yeah, it's really neat to see that all interconnectedness, all those scales. So what did I guess, did you find that this experience kind of deepened your sense of spiritual journey, on the path, that you've been following? Was there crystallization, some deepening for you throughout this process, getting to know yourself more, getting to get more access to your intuition, which you already were a very highly intuitive person. So, did you notice subtle shifts and changes within your relationship to sacred geometry to really start to engage with it in the way we did?
It's quite hard to say because I've been on quite my spiritual journey for the last 16 years hasn't been delicate. It's been a in my face, for want of a better phrase. I haven't been let off lightly. I every time I learn something or have deep dived into a subject, I think I like, okay, like I've learned all I need to learn, and then the universe seems to smack me in the face with something else that I need to really like look into. But I think with the sacred geometry, and as you know, I'd been exposed to it a few years before we connected, just not having physically drawn it myself. I had what I call a reset that I'd gone through with a guy that I met who did sacred geometry visualization techniques. I've meditated to a lot of sacred geometry imagery, and I think it'd been a few years of, I mean, I really know that sacred geometry expands our consciousness. And what I really like about it is there's no words involved. I find there's a hell of a lot of words involved in life, and sometimes you just want the brain to turn off from that multitude of words all of the time. And how are we thinking if we're not thinking in terms of words? So when I meditate to sacred geometry, I'm just meditating to imagery. There's no words. It feels like a bit of a switch off. But I definitely, we started the apprenticeship in December, was it? Oh, no, it was earlier than that. Anyway.
Yeah, November. You're right. It was November.
So it started around the same time as I started this quite intense job that I'm doing at the moment. So I've actually, it's been multi-layered. So through the work that I'm doing and through the sacred geometry reflection, it's been a total like 360 reflection of who I am and what I want to be doing with my life, and how I'm showing up to the world. But going back to this pure imagery thing of sacred geometry, I really like just being able to look at the images and contemplating something that doesn't involve words. And that may sound really bizarre, but I find there's just this constant conveyor belt of words and words and words, and how do you think about things? How do you contemplate things if you're not using words? Mm-hmm. How do we communicate if we're not using words? Well, there's sacred geometry for a start, that it's just images or art, and that has been a really important thing for me, because I just need sometimes just to have that switch off of enough of the words already kind of thing.
Yeah, no, that's a really great point to bring up. I mean, it sounds kind of like something to come back home to, in a way that resettles, regrounds you, gets you out of that linguistic orientation of perceiving the world, and just enter into this other relationship that is symbols and shapes, lines and circles, patterns, and then other little notions bubble up within that. It's like a bubbling well that doesn't have to communicate verbally. And I guess, besides the drawings, I'd say with the sacred geometry having such a strong connection and relationship to all patterns in nature, natural patterns that are around us. I remember you we started to take some photographs of like a snail trail that left a little slime mark on your window, or the spider web, images that you had there in the slideshow. Well, that's all this nonverbal communication that then awakens us to all the connections and relationships that are outside of our little bubble, And, because I have that tracking background, that's something that I really see emerge with people in sacred geometry with it. When I do them with it, I'm not even doing this tracking, but I see that the eyes and that non-cognitive verbal way of relating to the world kind of turns on in that way, in a new way, really a way to come back home, like I was saying, and settle in and discover, like you're saying, more about what works for you, and the path that really resonates with you, and what type of changes are associated with creating that life that we want to immerse ourselves in. It's all part of that journey, and sacred geometry kind of dovetails and weaves really well with that, to kind of go into that sense of discovery, because you're kind of relating and connecting to a part of to what you really are there on that page there, a part deeper than all the words and ideas. It goes more to a kind of an eternal truth, and that's what the sacred geometry is about, to me at least.
Yeah, and for me, it's really about multidimensionality. I mean, like, so for example, I'm sitting here having a conversation with you this evening. Well, it's evening for me. It's not evening for you, but I'm in a totally different dimension at the moment to the dimension I'm ordinarily in. I go to work 9 to 5, and I'm surrounded by people that don't even know what sacred geometry is, and I get like sucked into this vortex of 3D mentality, and it's the same conversations over and over again about the pandemic and about just things that I find really mundane, but that I have to engage in my day-to-day life to to function in society and meet my responsibilities as a living human being. But then I'll find myself here and having this conversation with you, and it's like I can feel like that other world doesn't even exist anymore, and it's literally like shifting into a different dimension, into another mode of reality. And I find that a lot when I'm meditating and looking at the sacred geometry imagery, and I am on my own, and I can project myself into that other dimension. So it's a bit of a harsh reality when 9 a.m. comes around on Monday and I have to go back into the lower dimensions. But yeah, it does create change. It creates expansiveness. It creates a shift in consciousness, and it takes me, as you have seen, and I think you've mentioned, about the paths that I go down. I just the things that I explore and the things that I seem to like get sent to look into is, I remember being very young, in my late teens and early 20s, and thinking I knew all that there was to know about the world, and just being a smart ass and knowing everything. And then 25 years later, I'm like, oh my God, the more that I learn, the more that I realize I just know nothing. There's just the amount of knowledge that there is out there, and the amount of different cultures and ways of thinking and the ways of seeing things. It's mind-blowing how expansive that the knowledge is, and I'm just overwhelmed by I really know very little.
Yeah, but it sounds like you're growing wiser with that realization. You know, when you realize that, then you grow in wisdom, and that there's so much to learn out there, so much you could explore, so many unknowns. But being comfortable with that unknown, you know, and being in the joy and all of it, you know, is really, I guess, part of what the journey is, you know. And there's just a couple things you said in there that stood out to me, because I know that the group and just the group that we of learners that we had together was just really, you know, you mentioned a few times, was just really significant and special for you to have this type of group to kind of
Yeah.
come together each week and explore through sacred geometry, to bring these people all over the country, US and all over the place, who are just coming together around this topic. But how that allowed, you know, you could speak to this more, but it definitely allowed you to kind of enter into those other realms that were outside of the normal scope of what you're exposed to regularly, and it was very valuable, it seemed, to you throughout the process of the apprenticeship.
Yeah, hugely valuable. Like I said, a lot of the I'm a very spiritual person. I have been for a very long time. I'm, you know, in the environment I live in, probably people are only just getting into the, you know, there's now shops popping up where I live that sell crystals, for example. And but it doesn't even feel like that's authentic. It just feels like they're jumping on the like spiritual bandwagon, and a lot of it doesn't feel authentic to me. And being in this group felt like really authentic kindred spirits that, you know, knew what I was talking about. If I talked about the law of attraction or about spirituality or the myriad of different topics that, you know, we talked about crop circles and, you know, lots of different things that came up. And, you know, none of it was really a surprise to any of us. But like I said before, if I mentioned sacred geometry in my work circle, for example, they just look at me like I'm speaking a completely different language. So it was a really, really valuable outlet for me. Really felt like a family almost, somewhere where I could really authentically be myself and say all these things that I'm longing to talk about all the time. And I just don't have an audience at all.
Yeah.
Until I met you guys.
Yeah, and you know, I appreciate you, you know, coming into the next round of it, you know, and you know, the Patreon that you're part of too. You know, there's just so many multiple ways to do it, but there's something I think special about the apprenticeship. I think, and I'll just talk about it for a second, the way I'm doing it, to really have a small group of people like this, really focused on this subject and sharing it. And you know, I'm coming up with something just about new, that's new for me and fresh. You know, like it's alive with me. I'm not going through this kind of routine curriculum that I've kind of hammered out, you know. So, you know, I think Marianne was also saying it's like you feel like you're on the trail, you know, of like this journey. And that's really what the 8-week kind of immersion into this is like. And the friendships and the conversations and the shares that are happening, you know, in the email trains and everything like that, even though these people might be thousands of miles away from you, it feels, you know, to me, like really heartfelt exchanges that are happening through this experience. So I was, first time I ever ran this course, first time I've ever even really taught sacred geometry. And I was just elated with the great group of participants and lovely souls that came together to, you know, do this together. And it was just a phenomenal experience, and just thankful that Jaqueline was there, and Dawn and Nancy and Marianne to kind of be the initial group, and many of her sticking on to continue on. So I love forming these relationship and friendships. And I love having, you know, Nancy and Marianne have videos up here. So I love having the apprentice groups come on and share their insights. Each one is completely new and unique. And yeah, Jaqueline, I think we're probably going to wrap up. I want you to have any more closing things to say if you'd like. And then I'll just add a little bit at the end.
I think just the last thing I would say is that I'm really looking forward to the next round of the apprenticeship. I'm looking forward to hopefully meeting some more kindred souls, some different people, and I'm pretty certain that there's some existing friends going to be there. And for me, it's really important, because I think I mentioned to you earlier, if I don't have something to focus on, I just drift. I'm like a I'm like a leaf in the breeze that I just go along with life and never accomplish anything. So with the previous apprenticeship, it really like hammered home to me, like, no, I've got to get something produced or created each week. And so I'm really looking forward to having that focus back, and on a weekly basis having something, you know, that I know that I'm going to stick to, and not just be floating down the river each week with not accomplishing anything creative.
Give yourself a good goal. You got goals. Yeah, well, I just, you know, that apprenticeship that you're in is full. Amazingly, it filled up already. We're even a few weeks out. So that's March 7th it's starting. So I did just start a new group for viewers. If you're interested in this, it's starting also March 7th. I'm doing it 2 hours earlier at 11 a.m. on Eastern time. So I decided to just start a whole new group rather than, you know, first of all, I want to keep a small group of 6 people in it. So I just started another group, and I'll do another 6 people there. And maybe we'll have some cross-pollination at some point, who knows? But hopefully that, you know, that's just been put up on the website recently. So check that out. And as well, I've got the Patreon site, which a few of the apprentices are part of as well. So check out New Geometry on Patreon. And I just want to give a big thanks for Jaqueline to stepping out and up here to share her artwork, share her interests, share her connection to spirituality, and just this phenomenal conversation we had. Just big thanks to you, and much love to Jaqueline. And to all the viewers out there, thanks for sticking around, and more content coming up soon. Some really neat material coming down the pike. Looking forward to sharing that soon. So thanks, everybody. Thanks, Jaqueline. We'll see you.
Bye.